Hi, my name is Nancy Frank Wilson. I'm going to do a tutorial today on basic grant writing. There are so many grant writing workshops and classes and online tutorials. Our goal today is just to give you the basic overalls. What are funders looking for? Where do you find funders? What are some tips to writing good proposals, and those tips that maybe keep your proposal in the running for evaluation. I come to you with a very long history of grants. I was a funder for the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, where we received U.S. Department of Transportation and U.S. Department of Justice money, and we granted it out to the state of Minnesota. We were also given opportunities to write federal grants to get additional money for the state, which you can imagine we really wanted to do, and we did. I am currently the Executive Director of the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, and I'm proud to say that the coalition's been working with Normandale Community College on this project, and I hope that you find today really, really helpful. Thank you. I hope this tutorial will result in more grant dollars coming into Minnesota to promote and further develop the field of collaborative dental hygiene practice. Let's get started. So you want to write a grant. In my experience, people have come to me with two different ideas. They want to write a grant either because they have a project that they need funded, so they're seeking money to pay for a specific program or project, or people just need money. Their organization needs money, and so they're looking for a grant opportunity to bring more funding into their organization. And those are two of the primary reasons why people say, hey, it's time for me to write a grant. I'm going to go through some of the terminology, and you might not remember all of them today, but at least give you an idea of the kind of terminology you'll see when you're doing some grant seeking and grant writing. So the first one, request for proposal or RFP. You'll hear RFP a lot. A request for proposal or an RFP is put out or let out by a funder. So in the RFP, what the funder is doing is they're saying to you, there's grant dollars available, and within the RFP, they're going to give you specific instructions for writing the grant that they want to receive. They're going to tell you the deadlines and the dates that things are due. They're going to outline for you what they want you to tell them. They're going to tell you probably the number of words you can use in each section. They're going to tell you the budgets that they want, if they want letters of support. It's kind of their recipe for the proposal they want to see from people. So RFP you'll hear a lot. An unsolicited proposal, you probably won't hear this very much, but basically what it means is someone let out an RFP, you found out about it, or you saw it, someone told you about it, and you are going to apply. Nobody came to you and said, here, please write a proposal to us. And again, a proposal is just it's your document that follows the RFP that says this is who we are, this is what we need money for, this is how we're going to spend it, those kind of things. A grantee is the person or the organization that receives a grant. The grantor is our funding. That's our funder. That's our Blue Cross Blue Shield. That's our state of Minnesota. Any funding agent would be our grantor. When someone's successful with a grant, they'll learn of their award. They've been awarded a grant. Sometimes they call it an NOA. It's the notice of award. So they might say, expect the NOA by March 5th, for instance. Letter of inquiry and letter of intent, or LOI, they're basically the same thing. You might see both of them in your grant writing careers when you're doing grant writing. But an LOI is really a smart thing for funders. And as a grant writer, I think you'll come to love it. What a funder does is a letter of intent. So they say you have 5 weeks to provide a letter of intent for this grant program. So they might say something to you like, in 500 words or less, tell us what you want funded. And maybe in 250 words or less, tell us how you're going to spend the money. It's very brief. And when they say letter, it is more like a letter that you're going to send the grantor. And what this does is this allows the grantor to say, okay, we have 100 letters of intent that came in. We're going to weed through those. And out of those, we might invite 25 of them to write a full proposal. So if that makes sense. So they're saying to you, look, we don't want to receive 100 grant proposals. We're going to narrow down the field. So all we're reading are those grant proposals that we really believe fit what we're looking for. And as a grant writer, it's marvelous because you're not going to spend a week or 2 weeks writing a proposal with absolutely no chance of getting funded. So whenever there's a letter of intent, I always feel like it's a very positive thing. Some people get discouraged. They say, well, we wrote a letter of intent and they didn't want us to submit a full proposal. And I always say, good for you, because you wouldn't want to do all that work without getting funded. Letter of support is the next thing, and a lot of you have probably heard of letter of support. Not all funders are looking for that, but what it is a letter of support from your partners, your stakeholders, saying, you're telling the grantor or the funder, hey, we really want you to fund this project. It will really help us in this way. I know as the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, we write letters of support for the Minnesota Department of Health grants, because whatever the Minnesota Department of Health Oral Health Program is seeking funds for, it will support Minnesota oral health. So we want to write those letters of support. When you're asked to write a letter of support, or if you are the person requesting a letter of support from one of your partners, give them an outline. Or if you're asked to write a letter of support, just ask the grantee, just say, can you please give me an outline of what you want me to say? I tend to write 3 or 4 different outlines and send them to different people, so all the letters of support don't sound the same. But this is really important so that when they write a letter of support, or when you're writing a letter of support for one of your partners, you're naming the grant what it should be named, and you're using the same terminology that you really should be using. It's just so much better. And in the end, we want the grantor, we want the funder to think that your proposal is fantastic and it's really, really easy to read. Our last one on this slide is allowable and unallowable costs or expenses. And that comes down to the RFP. In most RFPs, or requests for proposals, they're going to outline to you what's an allowable cost, what's an allowable expense. Can you buy food with this grant money? Can you buy equipment? Can you pay for staff time? So in most cases, they're going to give you a list of allowable costs or allowable expenses. And they're also going to give you a list of things that are not allowed or unallowable costs or expenses. And again, the more detail they give you, the better opportunity you have to write a successful grant proposal. And the most important thing is follow their directions, right? Follow what's in that RFP. We're going to go on to the next slide, and there's more terminology. The first one is a 501c3. That's actually a tax designation in the United States. It's a federal tax designation. It means a nonprofit agency. There are different types of nonprofit agencies, but a 501c3 is what the majority of organizations you will write grants for will be. A 501c3 is an organization that cannot lobby. It's the least political. Many of our organizations, including the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, is a 501c3. The reason I included it here in this tutorial is that oftentimes a grant funder will not fund a private organization. They won't fund General Mills, let's say. They might not even fund a state agency. They'll only fund a 501c3. So let's say, for instance, several of you got together, you had a fantastic idea for a collaborative dental hygiene program. You're going to do some advertising and some promotion of collaborative dental hygiene practice in Minnesota. But none of you together or apart of a 501c3. In this case, the grantor is only going to fund 501c3s. And if that's the case, you might want to go to a 501c3 that you're friends with and ask them to be your fiscal agent. And I think we'll cover that again later. But a fiscal agent is the person or the organization that's actually accepting and managing the funding. If I'm a 501c3, like the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, we can write grants and we're our own fiscal agent. We don't need one. But if you're a group of people and you're getting together to do a project and you are not a 501c3, or you're a different type of agency, maybe you're a 501c6, for instance, and they will only fund a 501c3, you got to find one. And that person would be your fiscal agent. Next, we move to direct costs and indirect costs. And the very basic explanation of what these are is a direct cost is usually cash, and an indirect cost is usually everything else. There can be exceptions to this rule, but not many. So when a funder says, we want you to match this grant with direct costs, what they're saying is, let's say it's an equal match. So we're asking for $100,000 from this funder. They want us to match direct costs with that grant award. So we have to come up with $100,000 on our own in order to be successful with this proposal. It's very, very difficult. Happens a lot more in governmental funding. So if the federal government wants to give some money to the states, that's more common. So the state has to go to the state government, the legislature, and say, can you give us some money? Or the state agency has to come up with some matching funds. Indirect costs are a little bit more difficult because we have to track them, and you're not writing a check. But on the other hand, they're fantastic because you're not having to write a check. So indirect costs could be the equipment that you're using for the grant. Maybe it's your administration costs for the grant, your secretary or your admin person to manage the grant paperwork, for instance. Maybe it's the person, let's say we're doing a collaborative dental hygiene practice awareness program, and we're saying the dental hygienists who are coming up with the verbiage or the language for our campaign, that's an indirect cost. They're not going to make money doing that. They're going to provide that service for free. The downside of indirect costs is they're a little bit difficult for us when we receive money. We have to track them. Sometimes you've got a really easy way to do that. You can look at your time card and you can say, okay, I worked 40 hours a week and 10% of that was indirect costs, things like that. But again, those are the kind of things that you'll work out with each project that you work on. And direct costs, as I already mentioned, could be matching funds. I covered that before, but sometimes direct costs and matching funds can be directly related, sometimes not. So I just want you to be aware of again, the terminology. That's really the most important thing. So you can say, yeah, I've heard that before, I've seen that before. The entity identification number, or the EIN, that's the federal tax ID number for 501c3. Most of them are going to start with a 41-. Grant proposals normally have to list an EIN, and that allows the funder to tie your organization to federal taxes. So when they're reporting at the end of the year and they say, we awarded ABC Coalition $100,000, that's a way for them to track their grant awards with the federal government, and you're going to do the same on your side when you do your taxes. The next is the CDFA, or the Catalog of Federal Domestic Assistance, and you'll see there's a link to it there. That's a federal website, and there's 10 federal grant programs that have consolidated their information into this catalog, so to speak. It's actually a website. That's just another source of grant funding for you. And because it's federal, I really wanted to include it here because the federal funding, while it's sometimes very, very difficult to get because of the competition, it is an excellent source of funding and generally larger sums of money, so that's great. The next is a cooperative agreement. So a cooperative agreement, it's different than a grant award or a grant contract in that a cooperative agreement is more of a give and take. For instance, the Minnesota Department of Health's oral health program had or has a cooperative agreement with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. And what that means is that the CDC, or the Centers for Disease Control, is more involved with MDH than it would be if it just awarded them money. They have more of a relationship, and there's more of a give and take and working together than there would be if it was just your average grant award, where you might submit reports a few times a year. It's more of a give and take relationship. Corporate giving programs are generally, they come from or they are initiated by an organization, usually a corporate organization, so a for-profit organization. And it's a way for them to be part of philanthropy and give back to their community. It's separate from, or it can be separate from, a corporate foundation. A corporate giving program is actually within the same organization. So General Mills and Target Corporation here in Minnesota, they have fantastic corporate giving programs. And what that means is they encourage employees to give financially. They also support employees giving of their time, whether it be during the workday or outside of the workday. And again, it's all part of a greater corporate giving program. And one of the reasons that I talk about this and I want to share this is that, let's just say, for instance, we're looking for funding for a program to build playgrounds. And this is actually something that happens in Minnesota. Let's say, for example, Target says, you know, we can't really fund playgrounds. It's not within what we normally fund. But we've got 100 staff people who would love to come on a Saturday and help you put that playground together. And they're generally going to be wearing t-shirts that match, and there's going to be food and things like that. And again, it's great for that company or that corporation. It's also great for the community. So I just encourage you to get to know those corporate giving programs in your area. And again, it's a really, really great way to get to know the funders within that organization as well. The last one on this slide is a peer review. What that refers to is that when a funder lets out an RFP and you write a proposal and you submit that proposal, generally, most of the time I should say, the people that read and review your proposal are staff members of that funder. So the Blue Cross Blue Shield Foundation staff, they're going to review your grant proposal. Some programs, however, FEMA is a great one, the federal FEMA program. They bring in peers to review and rate the proposals that come into the federal government for FEMA. So there might be firefighters and emergency management directors from all over the country that are reading and reviewing the proposals that they're going to fund. It's fabulous for an organization. It really is, because they're getting the boots on the ground, experienced professionals reviewing proposals that they're going to fund. And like I said, government does a really great job of it. In Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Public Safety, their Office of Justice Programs does it as well. And it's actually something that you can volunteer to do. And as a grant writer, it's an outstanding opportunity for you because you're going to be on the other side of it and you're going to be reading other people's proposals. And we learn so much by reading other people's work. And through that review process, as you're a part of it as a volunteer, you're also going to hear from the funder the kind of things they like, what they don't like, what they were looking for, what they don't see and they see within a proposal. So next time you're writing your proposal, you've learned all of that, and it's hands-on. I know that's where I learned a lot of what I teach from being a funder. Our next slide is knowing your organization. This is pretty basic. A lot of you say, well, I already know this. If you don't know it, get working on it now. Get working on it before you find an RFP to respond to. Define your organization. Have an elevator speech, 2 or 3 sentences or key points about your organization. What makes you special? With the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition, I often say to people, look, we're inclusive. We include the entire state of Minnesota, and anyone who cares about better oral health in our state can be a member. That's it. And that makes us special. We're different. So what this is all about is framing or connecting your organization to the funder. So if you know a lot about your organization, it's really easy for you to connect to your funder. And this ties into doing your homework. Before you start looking for grant funds, grant opportunities, or maybe if you're already doing that, make sure your financials are up to date. You've got all of your, if you're doing QuickBooks or whatever you're doing, it's up to date. You can run financial reports today and you're ready to go. You've got a mission and vision. Get a list of board of directors together, just do it right away. And usually the organization that they're with is a great thing to add, and maybe their profession. Get your IRS designation letter. So if you're a 501c3, that letter that from the IRS that says you are a 501c3, or if you're working with a fiscal agent, get that letter ready and just get copies of it. And then a narrative on your organization, what it's about. It's great to do this as soon as possible. You're going to do this anyway when you write a grant, but it's so much better to have it done now, so that when you write a grant, your sole focus is fulfilling the requests for proposal, filling that what they want to see. There are a number of types of funders. These are kind of the basics as I see them. They are foundations. They can be private corporate foundations. They can be nonprofit foundations. They can be family foundations. In Minnesota, the Dayton family has several different foundations. The Carlson family, families that have helped establish the state of Minnesota, they've got private family foundations. You can apply to them. The state of Minnesota is a funder. They've either gotten their money from the federal government. So a lot of times the federal government will give states X amount of dollars to let out or to award within the state. Or the Minnesota state legislature awards the state of Minnesota money. Let's say the Minnesota Department of Health, I'm just making this up. They get money from the Minnesota legislature for how to brush your teeth. And maybe they do mini grants around the state. The federal government is a funder, as I mentioned before. The federal government gets their money, just like the state does, when there is legislation that provides for it. I know years ago I worked on a teen safe driving program, and it was really important to me before I wrote the proposal is I did my homework, and I actually found in legislation the funding that had been passed by Congress to make this money available for funding. So I got to learn a little bit about it. This grant, and then I made some calls. This grant money was available for teen safe driving because a number of young drivers were killed in a state, and their congressman went to work on the Hill and said, look, we need more funding for teen safe driving programs. Sometimes the county, the city, or the region has grant funds as well, again, getting them from a variety of sources. And then we have some nonprofit agencies that will have them. Sometimes nonprofit agencies or organizations will do fundraisers. so that they have money so they can grant that out. There's a lot of different ways to find funding opportunities. The real simple ones are the Minnesota State Register. We get it through the Minnesota Bookstore, which is really funny, but I've got a link here and you can click on that. It's published every Monday. You can go through that and you can find the grant opportunities available. There's a Federal Register, and it's the same kind of thing. All funds that the federal government is going to let out, they have to be in the Federal Register. They're going to provide you 6 weeks. They're going to allow you 6 weeks to fill out that proposal. So just know if you're on top of it and you're always checking the Federal Register, you're going to have the most amount of time to finish that proposal and get it in. Grants.gov is a website that the federal government created that actually lists all of the funding opportunities within the federal government. And there's a link here, and what I always tell people is click on this link or go to grants.gov and sign up to receive notice of RFPs. It's easy, it's free. You can say, look, I want everything that's coming out of the federal government. Or you could say, I want opportunities within the Department of Health and Human Services and FEMA, the Department of Emergency Management, things like that. Or you can say, I want anything, any grant proposal, any grant opportunity that has to do with teeth, dental, dentist, and you can pick some keywords, and they're going to email those to you. It's really a fantastic service, and again, it's free. And you can always change it. You can say, I'm not working in this area anymore. I want to change that, and that's fine. There are a number of paid or subscription services. I don't really have a favorite. It all depends on your organization, and there's a list here. Click on them, take a look, see what you think. Again, there's private organizations that do it. Access Philanthropy is actually one in Minnesota. They have a service. You could actually meet with them. Minnesota Council on Foundations, the same thing. They're local. You can meet with them. But I just encourage you to do some searching. Take a look at these. EdUtopia is funding only education and education-related projects. So that might be one you're interested in. But just take a look and see what's around there. There's also a number of ways to research grant makers. I know it sounds funny, but a lot of times I always say that as a grantee, looking for grant opportunities is kind of like dating. I want to know the most I can about my date before we go out. And that's kind of what we talk about when we say researching grant opportunities or researching grant makers. Just learning about them. Who are the grant makers in certain fields? In Minnesota, Delta Dental Minnesota Foundation, they're our premier funder. They're our greatest supporter. I can't say enough good things about them. They support Minnesota Oral Health financially. They also support with their staff. They really are fantastic. Otto Bremer Foundation or Bremer Family Trust has been another one. They funded oral health. But get to know who's funded things in the past. You can ask people. You can look on their website. What kind of projects or organizations have they funded? Who are the usual suspects? Who's usually funding certain projects? Do some research into grant makers and their personal interests. Again, with those family foundations. I know the Cargill Family Foundation, for quite a long time, I don't know if they still do, they were really into literacy. So if you had a project and it wasn't literacy, chances that they were going to fund you were pretty low. If you had a literacy project, boy, they were the ones to go to. So, and there's some other ones, the United Way, you can do some research there, the Minnesota Council of Foundations. So I just encourage you to do that research. You can also hire people to do this, but it's really great for you to learn how to do it yourself if you don't already know, and maybe you do. The grant maker criteria, this is another thing I always want to discuss with people because there's this give and take. And the way I look at it is we're all very, very busy. Whether you're writing the grant or you're paying for someone to write a grant for you, there's a lot of resources that go into that. So my goal is always, let's write a proposal that we think has the greatest chance of being funded. So we look at, are we working on the right issue for this funder? Do we have the same interests, like I said, with Cargill Family Foundation and their literacy? Do we work in the right location? Is your geographic area of interest what the funder's looking for? There's a lot of funders that say, for instance, we only fund in the Nantucket area of New York. We only fund in Minnesota. So you really want to look at that. Geographic area is one of them. Do we care for the right people? Are we working with the people that they want to fund? If we're working for people who don't have dental insurance, is that something that our funders interested in funding? Does our money only have to go to licensed practitioners? Those kind of things. Do we do our work the right way? Is this the way the funder wants to fund it? And are we using the same language, or are we able to communicate the same way, that we understand and agree with each other? And again, this is something you get to know as you learn more about grantors. There's a few ways to make an initial contact. Sometimes the initial contact is just, you read about an RFP, you got a hold of the RFP, you wrote a proposal and you sent it in before the time expired. Other times, we're responding to those letters of inquiry or letters of intent. Sometimes you're writing a letter of inquiry. You're writing it yourself. Let's say you want to write, you're interested in the Carlson Family Foundation. You might want to write them a letter and say, this is what we do, this is who we are. Is it possible we can meet or have a telephone call? You can also telephone people. Sometimes your initial contact is the online application, or like I said, the proposal that you're writing. Most of us prefer a personal meeting. Very difficult to get sometimes, right? Funders, just like all of us, are very, very busy. But what I'm saying here is our goal is to make a contact, make more than one contacts, get to know the funder, and hopefully have them get to know you a little bit. It's always a benefit. And remember, funders, they have a job to do, and they want to do their work really well too. So this helps them as well. They can say, I'm really going to look at this proposal because I know a lot about XYZ organization, and they're doing some great work. We're interested in that. Again, what we want to do with our goals is talk about who we are. We know about the funder's interest. Do we have permission to submit a proposal? You'll find that some funders say, don't submit anything unless we've invited you to. Look at the range of the funding requested. They'll say, we're funding projects to do X, Y, Z, and you say, well, how much money can we ask for? That's going to be in your RFP. And if it's not, do some homework. Find out all you can find out. Ask some questions. And then pay careful attention to deadlines and timelines. Really, really, really important. Again, relationships are everything in the world. So some of our grant relationships would be individual to individual. Me as executive director of an organization, I talk to a funder's program officer. Maybe in the same scenario, I meet with the funder's trustees or their board. Maybe my organization has a relationship with another funder's trustees. So there's just a lot of different types of relationships, and they're all good. They're all positive. So letter of inquiry, letter of intent. So we're going to sell our organization and our story and give a very brief overview of who we are. If the funder doesn't know us very well, we're obviously going to want to give them more detail. It's not enough to say I'm interested. It's not enough to say I need the money. We always want to tie this back to there's a problem, we know how to solve it, and we can solve it. And we need your help, your money, your support, things like that. So when we write a proposal, an application, we're going to be responding to a request for proposal, request for application, a federal opportunity application, notice of funding opportunity. RFP is probably the most common, and that's what most people are going to call it. If you want to click on the second bullet, It'll just give you, if you aren't familiar, it'll give you a sample of an announcement or solicitation from the Medica Foundation in Minnesota. The next one is another link to the Kellogg Foundation, just to give you an idea of what they look like. Our last bullet, we're referring to the Minnesota Common Grant Form. And you're welcome to click on that as well. I can encourage you to look at that Minnesota Common Grant Form. And it's actually a really good idea for you to work on that and get that done as soon as possible. Because Minnesota foundations oftentimes will tell you, we accept the Minnesota Common Grant Form. If they don't use the Minnesota Common Grant Form, in the end, they're really asking you almost exactly what the Minnesota Common Grant Form is asking you to give them. So it's not a bad idea, it's actually a good idea, and it's a nice practice for you to work on that. And that way you have a lot of time, because grant deadlines come so quickly. So communication in writing is so important. It's the most likely way that you're going to connect with a funder. Some of my tips, and I think is really important, and I learned it being a funder, is we tend to get so many proposals from organizations saying, boy, we need help. This problem is horrific. The problem is bad. We don't have any money, and we need to do this, and we can't do it. We really know that. Funders know that. They know you need the money. And most of them are really a part of their organization. They know the problem is real. Not that we wouldn't tell them, but the important thing to tell them is the problem is real, but so is the opportunities that we have to create change. So you're saying, yes, the problem is bad, but we're skilled. We have the resources. We have the system. We have the opportunity to make things better. And that just makes for a fantastic proposal, because everybody wants to fund things that are going to be successful. And everybody's got a problem. We know that. So again, the problem can be solved by us, and we understand the funder. And we can do everything they need us to do. We can be who they need us to be, and we can solve the problem. Again, we're not pretending to do or be something different, but we've done our homework. We know that this is a really good opportunity for us, this RFP or this opportunity. So when it comes to making the ask, we need a specific number. Don't talk to a funder and give them a range. When you're responding to an RFP, most likely they're going to tell you that they have X amount of money available. But do your budget. Tell them this is how much you need and this is why. If you're asking for a meeting, that's all you're going to do. You're going to call or write or email or however you're going to reach someone and just say, can I have 20 minutes? I'll come to you, and be really, really good about their time. Just say, I said 20 minutes, we've been here 20 minutes, I'm going to go, kind of a thing. And then ask for permission to submit a full proposal. If it's invite only, make that ask. Or say to them, what is it that we need to do in order to be invited to submit a full proposal? And they might be really clear and tell you, right now we're not opening it up to more organizations. Or they might say, let's try. We've got a funding opportunity that's going to be available in December. Let's have you respond to that RFP. I think we'd like to hear from you. The most important thing is to follow up. I'm going to give you advice that I give everyone. Today, most of us use email. Especially younger people younger than me. They grew up sending email. It's very normal, or you grew up sending email. But what I tell everyone today is, buy some stamps, buy some note cards, real simple. When the Minnesota Oral Health Coalition became a 501c3, I bought letterhead, I bought business cards, and I bought very, very simple note cards. Easy. They've got our logo on the front. And my goal is to follow up with people with a handwritten personal note. I can't tell you how many times that's made a difference. You can put your card in there. It can be brief. Thank you so much for meeting. It was very interesting to learn more about your organization and what you fund. I understand that we're a good fit, looking forward to submitting a proposal, or you can say, I understand we're not a great fit, but we're really interested in following all the work you do, kind of a thing. So buy some stamps, it's worthwhile. So our next slide is proposal writing. And again, you've probably already written grants, you're working with someone who has written a grant, you've been to a class, you're going to go to other classes. These are my basics, and I love sharing these. I think these are really, really important. Follow the instructions. Pretty basic, pretty easy, but really, really read that RFP. If they're telling you 500 characters, you check your 500 characters. If they're telling you to explain XYZ, make sure you're giving that explanation. Whenever possible, include a real-life story. Again, a lot of RFPs aren't going to give you the time or the space. If they do, include that. Make it personal. Give them an opportunity to get an idea of what the work you're doing and how it affects people. You know, life is emotional. It's relationships and it's emotional, and funders are no different. And usually funders are, you know, they're givers, so they really want to connect to that emotional. We know you need the money. We know there's problems, but really focus on the positives. Focus on how your organization can make a difference and how it's going to be so fantastic for the people or whatever it is that you're making better by this grant. Be really clear about jargon and acronyms. I work a lot with federal government. It's horrible. So many acronyms. My goal always is to give my grant proposal. I used to give it to my dad or give it to my mom. Give it to a brother, sister, someone who doesn't have a clue what the field that you're working in. And have them circle anything you don't understand. It just doesn't help you to assume that the person that's reviewing your proposal knows what you're talking about. It really doesn't. Again, live within the limits of the RFP, you know, follow the instructions. Have or provide, if possible, a summary of that proposal that's really, really easy. Sometimes they'll ask you for that, and they'll say, this is what we're sharing with people is your summary. You have 300 words to tell us about this proposal. And then this is an option that I present to people, and you can't always do it, but whenever possible, provide a detailed goals and objective table. And it's just a simple table. You can use Word to create a table. List your goals, the objectives, timeline. Again, you're not always going to be able to do that. Whenever I've been able to do that, and I mean the RFPs allowed me to have that space to do that at that time, I've gotten really, really excellent feedback on it. And you don't have to do it, certainly. And please know it's just my experience, but it's been a benefit. So we talked a little bit, you know, about the proposal writing, and I've been going over different things. I just want to make sure we've got all those. They're going to ask for a budget, you know, usually talking about match, not always. Hard and soft match, again, it's that, are you giving cash? Are you matching them with staff time, with using our equipment? Maybe you're writing a grant for a collaborative dental hygiene practice, and your soft match is the local dental clinic. You know, you've got a dentist on the corner, and he or she is going to allow you to use a chair once a week. Wow, that's a great soft match. They're going to ask for a budget narrative, usually. Sometimes a budget narrative is optional. If it's an option, always take it. Explain what's in your budget. Don't have them guess. You want to be as clear as possible. Whenever you can, and whenever it's asked for in the RFP, a thorough work plan. Not too detailed, but thorough. Make sure someone reading that knows what you're going to do. Again, this is where your sister, your mom, your brother, your neighbor comes in handy. Have them read your work plan. If you see their eyes glaze over, you know it's time to shorten that. If they have questions that they ask you, you know that helps you to tweak that work plan. And again, you're not always asked for a work plan, but when you are, I think it's great to have that input. A lot of grant proposals, as funny as it sounds, they're going to give you the margins, the fonts, the number of pages that your proposal can contain. I know it sounds funny, but it really, really helps your funder. It helps to keep things all on a level playing field. If I want to tell you a lot about our organization and I write it in a size 9 font, that's not fair to the person that uses a size 12 font. So in a lot of RFPs, they're going to give you this. Next is appendices. Are they going to allow you to attach appendices? And if they do, what is it that you want them to know about you? Maybe this is your annual plan. Maybe the appendices, maybe it's a list of organizations you've worked with, anything like that. Not always going to provide that to you, allow you to attach appendices, but if they do, take full advantage. If you've got a great poster you want to show them. A lot of times you're going to ask for resumes. Make sure you have those. And again, we talked about letters of support. If they don't ask for letters of support, I generally don't do them. Because if they want to see them, they're going to ask for them. A little bit more about proposal writing. We call it the Lucille rule. And I'm just going to read it because I think it's a great one. It is said that at one time, the David and Lucille Packard Foundation would automatically toss out any application submitted with a spelling error. The most common misspelling was Lucille instead of Lucille. Now, if you use spell check, you wouldn't have caught that because it's a name and it's capitalized. So it's a great lesson. Lucille with one L is not normal. I worked for years with a woman named Michelle with one L. Very uncommon. So before you submit that proposal, check all that stuff. If the organization has 2 names, do they put them together? Do they capitalize the second part of it? Things like that. Look at their logo. Look at their website. How do they refer to themselves? Make sure you check that. And again, I've said this before, but need is important. Everybody needs money. The important thing for you, or what's really going to make a difference for you, is that you're going to tell them how best you're going to use their money, or that you are in an ideal situation to use their money wisely to make a positive change. Really, really important. Majority of applications today are online, and because they're online, a computer is vetting them or doing the first round. The computer is going to look at the number of characters, fonts, margins, things like that. They're going to look for things like Lucille or Lucille. Just make sure that you know that. Make sure that and we've talked about this, that the language and the grammar you're using is obviously correct and that it matches the funder and the RFP, that your connections and concepts are great. I've mentioned before the Minnesota Common Grant application. There's also a Minnesota Common Grant report form. That's another thing for you to look at. When you get a report, you're going to be writing grant reports. Looking at that grant report form now, or looking at this one, gives you an idea, oh, these are the kind of things I'm going to report on. Let's make sure I include some of that in my proposal. There are a great variety of online application formats. So just play around. Look at different options. Look at the grants.gov, what's in there. Look at the state register. Ask for some RFPs, even if you're not going to submit a proposal, just so you get to know them. And again, review that application in its entirety before submitting. Is it all together? Especially if it's online. Is it all, did you click it and it took? It's in there. Just double, triple check. This is, our next slide is just, we just did a cut and paste of what you'll see, a part of what you'll see in the Minnesota Common Grant application. And that 1 through 7 is really interesting. And as I said before, this is great homework. If you do this now, you're so much better off once you find an RFP that you want to respond to. And again, you'll go and look at the entire Common Grant application, but just to give you an idea. All right, so you've submitted. There's some follow-up. Clearly, we'd like to call them the next day and say, what did you think? At some point, you're going to get an acknowledgement. With the online applications, a lot of times you get one right away. Just save it. Save the email. Save it, in a special folder. Print it. Forward it to 3 people. I'm really clear that I've got that, so that if it comes back to me, say we never received it, and just say, geez, this is what I received from you. You will usually get some kind of acknowledgement and then say, I met with a funder last week and this person said, you'll hear from us May 1st. It'll either be a thank you very much, we are not funding you at this time, or it'll be thank you very much, let's set up a meeting to discuss next steps for our grant. You've been awarded a grant. Those rejection letters, it's all learning. It's all learning. Sometimes it's something that you've done wrong or you've done differently than you should have according to their RFP. Sometimes it's just rejection and there's no good reason for it. But whenever possible, ask for a follow-up. Say, hey, I know we weren't awarded a grant at this time. Can I come and visit with you just for like a half hour? Can we schedule a phone conversation just so I can learn more about what you're looking for and why we weren't a good fit or why it didn't work this time? And you'll get a variety of answers. Some people don't have time. Some people are happy they'll have lunch with you. So just depends. And make sure no matter what happens that there's really good communication between you and your partners and you and, like I said, the funder or the possible funder. So let's say I write a letter of support. I want to know if they got the grant. So make sure you're doing that communications. Maybe you have an organization, they want to do a press release, things like that. Boy, it's all important. It's all good. It's part of building those relationships. A few things to say about state grants and some other sources. And I mentioned this before. There are state grants available because either the federal government created a funding source and sent it to the states for a state agency to grant it out, or the Minnesota State Legislature created a grant program or created funding in some method or not, and that money's available. So when it comes to government money, it's most likely going to come from some active legislation. I've got a link here to the state register. Again, when you look at that, you're going to see who is eligible to apply, how much money is available. How do we find that solicitation? Usually in the state register, and as you do your exploration into that, it'll say contact Jan Smith at mn.state.us, and ask for an RFP. Or it'll say go here, things like that. What's that application process all about? With the federal government, sometimes with the state, they want you to have a DUNS number. Apply for that number. I could go into that, I won't go into it. Google that. Make sure that it is a government website. Some people will charge you money to apply for a DUNS number. Don't pay a dime for that. What expenses will they reimburse? What are the requirements for reporting back? And for you, look at the pros and cons of this RFP. Is this worth it for you? Do you think you have what it takes to get this, to be awarded this funding? I wrote a grant for a governmental agency, and they wanted me to write every single grant that was available in the world. And I said, you're going to pay me and you're not going to get this grant. I know you're not going to get it. And finally, I had a guy say, look, we just have to show we're looking for money. And I said, yeah, but I want a good record that says I get X amount of percentage of the grants I write. You're gonna wreck my record. But that was my job. So the next slide is just, again, it's just a little snapshot of what you'll see with the Minnesota State Register. Department of Human Services, Mental Health Division, notice of request for proposal for a qualified grantee to improve and sustain assertive community treatment services. If this is something that you are qualified to do, you just read, so there's notices hereby given to blah, 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 and it says, work is proposed to start July 1st. For more information or to obtain a copy of the RFP, contact. And see, it's got Casey Norleen down below, so you'd email her. And what I do is I do a cut and paste of that top heading. Minnesota Department of Human Services, Mental Health Division. I do a cut and paste and say, may I please have the RFP? That way I don't misspell anything. I know I've got it right. And what you'll see below that is really, really important. This is the only person designated to answer questions by potential responders regarding this request. Super important. You may, let's say you meet someone who's in the mental health division, but it's not Casey. And you say, hey, I'm writing this proposal for these ACT services. Boy, what do you think about this? And most likely they will say, look, I don't answer questions on that. Casey Norleen or Casey is the only one who's going to answer questions. Under some strange circumstance, let's just say that person gives you information. You don't get funded. And you say, well, Joe Blow told me this. It's very clear here. The only person designated to answer questions is Casey. So ask Casey. A lot of times what happens too with funders is they'll say, and this could be in the RFP, let's just say for instance, they might say, questions are being accepted to Casey and this person by a certain date. So everybody writes up their questions, they send them to Casey, let's say by June 1st. June 6th, there's a Q&A. Here's all the questions that were answered, here's all the answers. So they're in writing. So this Casey doesn't have to answer 30 questions that are the same, and she maybe gets them different. That way everybody gets the same questions, they see the same answers. Federal grants, next slide, federal grants come from the same place states do, from taxpayer money and legislation. Grants.gov, again, it's a very similar thing. Who's eligible? The other thing that's great if it's reported, in federal grants, the RFPs are usually tell you how many grants will they award. This is super important. For instance, you might read an RFP for federal money, and it says $500,000 available. And you say, oh, wow, I could really use $500,000. We will reward one grant. So right away I look at that and I say, okay, I'm going to write a federal proposal. That's going to take me about 50 hours of work. And they're only going to award one grant in the entire nation. I'm not writing that proposal. I don't think that's going to help me. Or they say, we have $500,000 available. We're going to let out 100 grants or 200 grants. So again, you might say, you know what? For 50 hours of work, is that enough money? Is it worth it? So just those kind of things. And it's, again, the DUNS number and things like that. On our next slide, we look at the grants.gov. It's a snapshot. I encourage you and hope that when we're done, you go into grants.gov and you look around and you sign up to get those emails sent to you. But this is just a little snapshot of the opportunity number. So that's the number that the Federal Catalog of Assistance has for it. The opportunity title, the agency, the status, the posted date, the closing date. And again, if we showed more of it, you'd see the rest of it. And have some fun. Do some keyword searching. Let's say do dental, do dentist, do hygienist, do collaborative. Just play with that and see what you get. You may come up with one grant opportunity, you may come up with 30. You may find, let's say we're looking for something on diversity. Well, you may find that the National Science Foundation is funding diversity, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is, and FEMA is. Oh, wow. that kind of thing. So I just really encourage you to play around with these and get signed up. When we're done here, you're going to click on some of these links, sign up for grants.gov, mark your calendar to read the state registry, research federal grants, apply for a DUNS number. We can go through this terminology again. I think you've got it. Letter of intent, letter of support. I think we're good. Going on to the next one, 501c3. In a lot of cases, that's that nonprofit tax status. And again, catalog of federal domestic assistance, corporate giving program. We went through all of these at the beginning. Just wanted to give you a reminder of how much you've either learned or how much you've been reminded of. And you can always go back to the beginning again and go through these, or Google them. Google them and get some more information on them. The important thing for me is that these are terms that you are now familiar with. You've seen them a couple times. I've talked about them. Look at how they'd be connected to the next RFP you read. So, and lastly, this is me. If you have any questions, email me, call me, go to our website, minnesotaoralhealthcoalition.org. There are great ways to connect with me or connect with one of our board members. We've got a couple, we actually have 2 committees now that we'd love to have you join. I would love to hear from you, and if I don't hear from you, I'm going to assume you're writing super successful proposals and bringing a lot of funding into Minnesota for the field of collaborative dental hygiene practice. Thank you.